Countries across the globe have experienced a paradigm shift due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this includes the education sector. This was a baptism of fire to all of us, which entailed COVIDification of education. So let me proceed by greeting you all a COVIDified day. My name is Mr. Joseph B. Quinto, and this study is titled COVIDifying Education Through the Lens of Award-Winning Educators in a State University in the Philippines. According to PANEV 2021, one of the most significant shifts is in the way education is delivered, from the traditional on-site or residential to online platforms. In consequence, Rasmatadilla et al. 2020 stated that alternative learning systems have been adopted by various countries to respond to these educational dilemma. All in all, debate still continues about the pedagogical practices in the Philippines as face-to-face classes won't push through for the majority of degree programs in higher educational institutions. Henceforth, this research aimed to spotlight the pedagogical practices and teaching experiences of award-winning educators in a state university in the Philippines during the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, it sought to answer the following research queries. Number one, how did the profiles of the award-winning educators affect their migration from face-to-face to distance education? Number two, how did the award-winning educators conduct their classes in the wake of the pandemic? And number three, what were the roadblocks that the award-winning educators encountered in their classes and how did they overcome them? The study followed a qualitative phenomenological research design. The sample was chosen based on the search made by the university's supreme student government on the students' choice for the most adaptive, effective, and flexible teachers amidst the new normal in education in the first semester of academic year 2020-2021. From 31 nominees, 10 educators were awarded. However, due to personal reasons, 8 among the 10 awardees agreed to participate in the study. To address the research queries, the researcher created an interview guide that followed the framework for the development of a qualitative semi-structured interview guide by Calio et al. 2016. After the formulation of the preliminary semi-structured interview guide, it underwent an expert validity. Then, 2 nominees from the roster were selected for the pilot testing. Based on the results, the researcher incorporated some changes in the interview guide. A one-on-one in-depth interview was done. When the data was transcribed, they were sent back to the participants for member check or participant validation. The remarks of the participants were then taken into consideration. The data was analyzed following a qualitative thematic analysis based on descriptive phenomenology by Sandler et al. 2019. Let me present the significant findings. Research query number one. How did the profiles of the award-winning educators affect their migration from face-to-face to distance education? The table shows that the award-winning educators and their number of years in the teaching profession, their highest educational attainments, and their number of course preparations per semester during the pandemic. All the educators agreed that their years in service and their educational attainments helped them in their migration from face-to-face to distance education in varying degrees. On another note, the number of course preparations affected some educators in a difficult way during the pandemic. EH shared that even though I only have between 3 and 4 preparations during the pandemic, I feel like the loads were really heavy. It affected me or my migration in such a way that it gave me more difficult time to prepare for the modules as I wasn't used to this kind of orientation. Research query number two. How did the award-winning educators conduct their classes in the wake of the pandemic? In general, the award-winning educators conducted their classes through the use of preparation and implementation. The preparation commenced during the mid-year of the academic year 2019-2020, while the implementation took place in the first semester in the academic year 2020-2021. The educators mentioned that the state university in which they're working has a learning management system called Google Classroom. The university also conducted a university-wide orientation and training to help faculty members in their migration. E2 explicated the 5 E's in the creation of modules were explained to us. It's good that they conducted those seminars. Then, we're given tips on how to conduct classes in Google Classroom. These information helped us especially on how to handle students online. The award-winning educators implemented varied ways to conduct their classes, which are exemplified in the table. The award-winning educators incorporated instructional methods via video lectures using PowerPoint presentations, instructor-made videos, voice recordings, Google Forms, Google Meet, Zoom, PlagScan, Grammarly, Facebook groups, Facebook Messenger, Facebook Live, YouTube, text messages, phone calls, and printed modules. Under assessment, the award-winning educators incorporated formative assessments such as self-assessment questionnaires, interview questions, quotes and photo interpretations, puzzles, and surveys, summative assessments via Google Forms, and videos. Under feedback, the award-winning educators incorporated individual feedback provided in Google Classroom and Facebook Messenger to call the attention of students, to acknowledge student submissions, to ensure the receipt of the materials, to point out errors, to provide comments, and to provide encouragement. Collective feedback solely provided through Facebook Messenger to reiterate something on their work, to remind them that requirements are submitted, to remind them that requirements aren't submitted, and to remind them that requirements are submitted on time. And feedback from students during classes through Google Forms and after sifting comments on Facebook. Research query number 3. What were the roadblocks that the award-winning educators encountered in their classes and how did they overcome them? The first roadblock is internet connectivity. The solution? Using self-learning packets or offline modules and multiple platforms. Another roadblock is communication with students. The solution? Staying professional in answering students, reaching out to them, and using dialects or the language that students commonly understand. Another roadblock is integrity of students' answers. The solution? Using extensions on Google Classroom, letting students open their cameras during summative assessments, using Grammarly and PlagScan to detect plagiarism, and dividing students in groups. Another roadblock is quality of students' work. The solution, selecting the most essential learning competencies needed by the students and minimizing digital divide. Another roadblock is teaching laboratory courses. The solution, sending comprehensive videos. Finally, the well-being of the educators. The solution, setting a schedule to accomplish tasks. The primary purpose of this study was to spotlight the pedagogical practices and teaching experiences of award-winning educators in a state university in the Philippines during the COVID-19 pandemic. One finding showed that the years in service and educational attainments were helpful factors in the educators' migration, which means that educators in general are encouraged to continue reflecting on their teaching experience in these trying times and continue in their advanced degrees in their respective fields of specialization. However, the number of course preparations per semester made teaching in the pandemic more difficult. This implies that educators could have more focus in preparing their classes, which are tailor fit in distance education if their number of preparations is lowered. Another finding showed that the award-winning educators conducted their classes by means of preparation and implementation. These are procedures that other state university educators and teachers in general may adopt or modify in the Philippines. At last, the educators specified roadblocks that they encountered during the first semester of the academic year 2020-2021 and how they overcame them. This may provide an avenue for teachers to reflect on the same problems or implement the same solutions wherever and whenever they deem necessary. The study has several limitations though. First, The research was only limited to the pedagogical practices and teaching experiences of award winning educators in one state university in the Philippines. Second, generalizing the findings may not be possible due to the nature of its design. Finally, 8 among 10 of the awardees participated. In the future, a comparison can be drawn from other educators in other state universities and colleges in the Philippines. Other researchers could also lean on the perceptions of students regarding the best practices employed by their teachers during the pandemic. These are only some of my references in this particular study. Once again, I'm Mr. Joseph B. Quinto, and let's continue COVIDifying education. Thank you very much for your attention.